There's some jokes I've seen online before where this is how I apologize to my husband, and it's like a woman who will come up to her grumpy looking husband on the couch and she'll just be like, oh, what are you watching on TV? What do you want for dinner? And like just start being nice again. And that's not an apology. It doesn't matter if it's your husband doing it or the wife doing it. It's not an apology. I cannot stand when people can't say I'm sorry, but instead they choose to just start being nice again. That's not okay. That's something I saw a lot growing up, and I will never be that person. Like when Alright, hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Caitlin and I run the blog called Mrs. Midwest. Today we are going to be talking about the topic of marriage, more specifically 5 things I have learned in 5 years of marriage. My husband and I recently celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary. I have a vlog all about it if you're interested, but I thought it was finally time to address some of my marriage advice now that I've been married for 5 years. On my channel, I've given relationship advice, dating advice, but I don't often talk about straight up marriage advice. Part of it is because I didn't quite feel qualified. I had only been married for 2 or 3 years when I started YouTube. And I also was curious to see how having children would affect my marriage. I wanted to beef up my marriage. I wanted to learn more about marriage. I wanted to basically be more experienced before I ever shared my full-on advice with you guys. I've only been married for 5 years. I'm not like a 20-year marriage veteran. I'm still learning about relationships, long-term relationships, but I thought it was time to kind of compile some of the things that I've learned and a lot of the ways I've kind of improved my marriage in the last 5 years, because I know a lot of you are curious, and essentially just open up the topic of marriage on my channel, because I focused a lot on dating, on what we should look for in a future spouse, relationships, 10 things I love about my husband, but I've never full on shared this is what I do in marriage. And so you're gonna find a lot of Christian women's advice online about marriage. Mine might be a little different than that, and there's always stuff to add. So please, if I do not cover some of your marriage advice, leave your tips in the comments below. My comment section here on YouTube is kind of like a forum a lot of the times for so many of our feminine sisters to just add their own tips and advice for anyone creeping through our comment section. So if I miss anything, please add it below, and know as well there's a lot that I'm not going to be able to cover in this video, but let's dive in, starting with number 1. And this might be a little surprising, but it's something that I've changed in the last year after reading the book, The Empowered Wife, and that is to prioritize self-care. Self-care? Mrs. Midwest, did you not make a video at the beginning of your channel talking about how we shouldn't have a goddess mentality, how we shouldn't be self-centered, how we should live for others and focus outwardly, and that's how we will feel better? Yes. I do think self-care in the terms of self-obsession, putting ourselves above everybody else and being selfish can be negative, especially in a marriage. But the self-care I've learned about after reading the book, The Empowered Wife, which you guys have to read, I'm going to make a whole video about it. It's changed my marriage, changed my life. But the concept behind self-care in a marriage is about you as a wife doing things daily for yourself to bring bits and pieces of joy into your day. So essentially you won't be depending on your husband as your source of happiness and looking to him and feeling resentful towards him when he does his hobbies and things like that. And so self-care, people think of it as bubble baths or becoming a wine mom, you know, having to have a huge glass of wine in the evening to unwind. That's not really what I'm focusing on. What I've changed in the last year with self-care has just been adding little bits to my day. Especially as a mom, it can be hard because you're so busy, but adding bits to my day that are just for myself. And by doing that, I've increased my daily happiness and joy, and that has a massive effect on my marriage, because when I'm happier and joyful, it allows my husband to be happier and joyful. And I know that might feed a little bit into the stereotype of happy wife, happy life, which I don't necessarily agree with. I don't think that families should be built around whether or not mom is happy or whether or not the wife is happy. But I do notice that when I'm feeling fulfilled and when I'm doing my thing, the rest of my marriage flows so much better, because self-care in a marriage can be an antidote to built up resentment. It's working on getting your needs met so that you can kill resentment in a marriage, because I know a lot of wives kind of get worn out at the end of the day. I was feeling that way, especially in my first couple years of marriage, because I was trying so hard to be this perfect wife, cleaning up all the time and focusing so much on homemaking that I didn't really take a lot of time for just nourishing the things that make me happy. And through the book, The Empowered Wife, I've learned how crucial it is in a marriage to not just do your duties, but to also find ways to bring joy into your family. And yes, you can be joyful while washing the dishes. You can serve as, scripture says, serving unto the Lord. But you can also actively choose to participate in things that bring you joy. And these don't have to be massive things like, goodbye family, I'm going to go shopping for 4 hours this afternoon. No, it can be as simple as listening to a certain podcast while you're having your special morning cup of coffee with maybe a dark chocolate on the side. That's something I like to do. It can be watching a K-drama in the evening for 1 hour. These things don't have to take you away from your family or from your husband, but they have to be something that's specifically for you, and it's not like a duty. Like, I don't view taking a shower or going to the grocery store as self-care. Now, if I go to the grocery store and I get a latte and I kind of mosey around like the shoe section, sure, maybe that's a little bit more of self-care, but essentially it's about kind of thinking of yourself more. And this advice is going to conflict with some of my later advice in the video, about thinking of your husband first. But I have changed this in the last year, and it has just transformed my daily life. One thing I've learned about marriage is that if you're run down, if you're exhausted, if you're feeling kind of bitter because you haven't had any fun all day, it's going to hurt your spouse, because that's the person that's closest to you. You're one flesh, you're married. And I've realized that when I focus on just relaxing, like taking a nap, going for a walk, sometimes these things involve my children, like bringing my sons through the drive-thru to get an extra coffee, whatever. Like, when I do those things, those little tiny things throughout the day that bring me joy, everything in our marriage flows so much better, because I'm not sitting there thinking, oh, he got to go hunting last week and I've been cleaning the house and cooking, Sometimes, like, self-care in a marriage does mean getting takeout on the weekend. Sometimes it does mean, this was hard for me, but sometimes it does mean leaving the laundry until tomorrow so you can put your feet up at the end of the day. And I know it might sound like I'm advocating for being lazy, and I'm not. This might sound crazy. It might even sound contradictory to some of my earlier advice on my channel. And in a way it is, but in a way it's not. It's about finding joy in your daily life and weaving that into your daily duties as well. Because if you wake up and you just do duties all day, day in, day out, it sucks a lot of that playful energy out of your life and eventually out of your marriage as well. And so something that self-care, I wish there was a better term for it, but there really isn't. Something that self-care can do is really inject joy and inject that playful energy back into your life as a woman, as a wife, and then eventually, yes, that does impact your marriage. It isn't just about like sitting in a bubble bath and wallowing in my own selfish thoughts. It's about savoring life, finding the joy in life. And I've talked about whimsical living before on my channel, finding like whimsical, wholesome, joyful, sparkly things you can do throughout the day. And I've often approached those activities from a perspective of how can this bless me as a person? But now I'm realizing that those things also bless your marriage. Some of the self-care I even do is like watching my favorite vloggers, reading blogs I like online, spending time on Pinterest, just filling my life with inspiring things that bring joy. Because I don't believe that marriage needs to be this hardcore duty comes first, like mom and wife, like we're gonna suffer through these hard years, and like you just like, you know how everyone says it's not about love isn't about a feeling, it's about a choice and an activity, and we just need to like buckle down. And I get that, and I think that's a great framework. We shouldn't give up on marriage, we shouldn't give up on love. It is a duty, it is a choice, but why not have fun while living our daily life? Why not approach things through a lighthearted attitude? Why not, infuse some joy into our personal life so that when we are doing the laundry or cooking again or picking up after our maniacal toddler, we can kind of have a smile about it. I know a lot of Christian content talks about how to have joy despite suffering, which is a Christian belief that I hold very firmly and I've talked about on my channel. But I also think some of the ways you can find joy while suffering, say you're really just not wanting to mop, or you're just exhausted from like daily duties as a wife. Maybe you work all day and then you come home and you have to cook for your husband and then go to sleep, and it's just really exhausting. Some of the ways you can enjoy life and find joy amidst your duties and the suffering or whatever is by doing self-care. Like, it seems so obvious, but I think a lot of times we as women and wives, especially people who are interested in this kind of content, like self-improvement content, femininity content, we're always looking for what we can do to improve and work harder and be better. And that's awesome. But it's also okay to just pause and to rest and to focus on just pampering yourself and exploring your interests. And so if you're wondering why I've gotten into K-dramas in the last year, if you're wondering why I don't always push myself on YouTube or on my blog, it's because your girl is focusing on finding daily joy, and that doesn't always include stretching myself super thin. Now remember, this has levels of privilege to it. When you're a mom of a newborn, it's hard to get self-care in. I acknowledge that. If you're working full-time 60, 70 hours a week, it's hard to get self-care in. And that's why I love the tips of self-care does not have to be this like super long, drawn out, expensive thing. It can be very simple, so much so as buying your favorite brand of cookies and having one every morning, or taking time to sit in front of a window and look at a nice view. It's self-care, no matter how small. And I really encourage you to start infusing it and sprinkling it into your day. And I will link my blog post below if this is still a little confusing. There's so much more I can say about it, and I go into detail in it in my blog post. But if you really want the creme de la creme of this topic, it's in the book, The Empowered Wife. I will link that below as well. But we got to move on to the second thing I've learned in my 5 years of marriage. And that is hopefully this encouragement. I hope this is encouraging to a lot of you. But the second thing I've learned is that you can break this cycle. I'm not going to go into detail here on my channel, but a lot of you have gleaned that I come from a messy family situation. I don't talk about it online as a personal decision, but I do think it's applicable here to just kind of let you guys know a little bit more about what my mindset was entering marriage. So I had zero doubts of entering into marriage with my husband because he is honestly the best person I've ever met. I wish by the end of this life that I will be more like him. He's an amazing person. And I'm so grateful for him. But I was nervous about marriage in the sense that I grew up with a not fantastic model of marital relations. Okay, that's a gentle way of putting it, but there was just not a lot of marital harmony in my home for like consistently. When I was a small child, it was okay, but as I got older, it was more and more obvious, like the issues in my home. So it kind of planted a lot of fear in me because going into marriage, I was thinking, I don't know what I'm doing. What if I make the same mistakes as my parents? And what if I don't know what to do, or what if I don't know what to do or how to handle things because my default is what I've seen growing up? And I was honestly very afraid of marriage in a sense, but I forged through because honestly, as a Bible-believing Christian, God made marriage and that's part of his design. And so I trusted him. I also believe in sanctification as a Christian, that the Holy Spirit and the Lord, he can work on us throughout our life to become more like him. And so I knew that I needed to trust in the Lord and enter into marriage while also acknowledging that I did not know what I was doing. I didn't know like honestly anything about true marital harmony because of my background. And I know a lot of you can relate to that. Most people, you know, I think 50% of marriages end in divorce, and we don't often talk about the people who don't get divorced, but it's like really horrible. But just kind of those family dynamics where it's like there's a constant cold war going on in your home between your parents, and there's just tension and drama and insane like vibes on a family vacation, and it just feels like there's no peace, you know, and you're constantly walking on eggshells and just worried about what the day is going to hold, and there's people taking sides, and it's just crazy. That's the background I came from. And so I was worried going into marriage that, you know, in the heat of the moment or feeling emotional in an argument or over the years, that I would just fall back into those behaviors that I learned growing up. I was really worried about that. So my advice, if you're in this situation, is to just, first of all, acknowledge it neutrally. So I think in the beginning I used to feel really like ashamed and saddened by my background and kind of my lack of knowledge of how to have a healthy relationship. I was kind of ashamed of it, and then I felt really guilty and bad, and it was just very negative. But then I noticed a lot of other people, they'll kind of refuse to acknowledge that they're inexperienced or they don't know what they're doing when it comes to marriage, or that they may have grown up with a bad example, like they don't want to admit that. So my advice is to just view your background, even if it's horrible, just view it neutrally. I didn't blame myself for where I come from. It's not my fault. I was somebody's kid, you know. But I also didn't avoid responsibility for the fact that I might fall into negative behaviors in marriage, or you know, say you're start to have an argument with your husband. I could acknowledge when I would fall into bad behaviors that I learned growing up, and the sinful nature too, just of being a person and being a human. I struggled a lot with anger when we first got married, and it's gotten so much better over the years, like by the grace of God, thank you Lord. But I really struggled with just emotion regulation and how to not go from like 0 to 60 when you get frustrated, or how to not start a cold war in your home, because those were just patterns that I was so used to. And so breaking the cycle, I just want you guys to be encouraged, because if you're willing to work on yourself and if you're willing to acknowledge your shortcomings, you are already leagues ahead of that broken situation that you fear happening. I have had to do a lot of self-work. I've had to do a lot of self-reflection, I guess, and also be very willing to apologize. If you're willing to learn, that's awesome. And that's honestly what I did. I went into marriage willing to open up to a completely different way of relating than what I grew up with. And I honestly let my husband lead the way in a lot of ways, you know, to show how our family dynamic should go. And I was just also very willing to learn from people online and books like The Empowered Wife. Just learn as much as possible, because I wasn't taught healthy strategies for dealing with a close long-term relationship like a marriage. When we first got married, I was extremely like defensive when I didn't need to be. It was to the point where if my husband came and started watching me as I was cooking something, I would feel defensive about like, oh, does he think he can do it better than me? And it was so ridiculous, but that's how my mind was going. It was my mind, especially in the beginning of marriage, was constantly on the defense, like viewing my husband as an opponent, like someone who was going to pop up and criticize me, someone that I had to be, you know, protective against instead of protective for, you know, protecting him and me as a team. And it's been a lot of focus just of reminding myself, me and my husband are a team. He loves me and I need to show him love, and he's not my enemy. He's not criticizing me. And we can have a fun, thriving life together. And so over these past 5 years, I've had to strip away a lot of that self-defensive kind of instinct, you know. So now if he comes and I'm like cooking dinner, I don't think, oh, he's criticizing me. I just like, hi, welcome to the kitchen. I'm happy to see you. And that's a huge change for me. And I could go on and on about this, but essentially you can break the cycle. You know, you don't have to have a bad marriage because you saw a bad marriage, but you have to be willing to acknowledge your own faults. And that's something also I've kind of learned from that book I was talking about earlier. You can only control yourself. You cannot control your husband, no matter what the marriage books say, no matter what people tell you. You can't control him. You can only control yourself. And so by working on yourself and ensuring, not that you're perfect, you'll never be perfect, you're never going to avoid arguments in a marriage, but you can avoid total destruction of marriage by working on yourself and seeing where you're flawed and where you can improve. Another example could be anger. I would go shoot into like severe anger mode when we would have an argument. And it's because I felt like really panicky, like I have to bring my points to the forefront, otherwise he won't hear me, and I have to really advocate for myself, otherwise my needs won't get met. And I was just very like, again, that self-defensive, I need to fight for myself, you're my enemy. And now, like, we still get into arguments, but I'm much more patient because I don't view him as my enemy, but I also know that he cares about me. He wants my needs to be met. Hello, Harley. Hi. But essentially, I just want you to know that even in just 5 years, I've changed a lot. Like, I'm not the same wife I was 5 years ago. And I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago. And I have not repeated what I saw growing up. And that's because I've been willing to change. I've been willing to put in the work. I've been willing to learn. And then also finding role models that you can kind of pattern yourself after in a way. But I would say don't choose people online that you don't know. Not even me. Like, you guys don't know our day-to-day life. Try to find somebody that you can interact with in real life. Whenever I think of the kind of marriage I want, I always think of my best friends growing up. Their parents just had a really nice marriage, and whenever I went over to their home, I felt like they were just very in love with each other, very low-key, happy, relaxed people, and I loved the vibe of their family. And then I also have some cousins. I love their parents, my aunt and uncle. Their marriage is just fun and happy. And I know these people in real life, and so I know more about their actual marriages. And again, no one's perfect, but when I think about, what would Aunt so-and-so do, or Mrs. blah, 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 it kind of puts a face to a name and a behavior to the situation, and it puts marriage into context for me, because I think a lot of us don't realize it, but you're subconsciously putting your marriage into context every time you have an interaction with your spouse, and oftentimes that context is your parents' marriage or lack thereof, or their relationships. You just kind of subconsciously put yourself into that situation. So now, instead of thinking of my parents and focusing on their marriage or the dynamics I knew growing up, I think about these other marriages that I really admire and I'm inspired by, and that has been so helpful. All right, the third thing I have learned in 5 years of marriage is to have lighthearted fun. This kind of ties into the self-care. It kind of ties into the previous point too, but lighthearted fun is so key to a marriage because it is so key to a dating relationship. When you are falling in love, when you are deciding to spend your life with that person, lighthearted fun played a huge role. And then a lot of times, a lot of us get married and then the lighthearted fun gets sucked out as we combine finances and lifestyles, and we're working, and then eventually kids and trauma and all this crazy stuff happens in life, and you lose some of that lighthearted fun. But I've noticed that some of the happiest marriages, the happiest people, they are able to laugh at themselves, they're able to laugh together, their homes are filled with laughter, and even if they're going through difficult times, trauma, what have you, they're able to laugh. And so, for example, these last 5 years have not been trauma-free for us. You guys, if you haven't yet watched my birth stories video, you might not know what I'm talking about, but essentially I experienced a form of severe birth trauma. And our marriage did not fall apart during that time. And I think one of the things that helped during that difficult time, and just marriage in general these last 5 years, has been our willingness to try to have lighthearted fun together. I used to dive into dark, deep emotions. So if that birth trauma had happened to me like 10 years ago, I probably would have been such a broken woman for many years. I used to listen to really sad music all the time, really just dive deep into my emotions and scratch at my painful wounds and think about them all the time and talk about them all the time. And I would do a lot of, I don't like small talk, I like deep conversations. So I would have these deep, intense conversations with people, but really it was just trauma dumping, trauma bonding with people, always talking about difficult, hard things. And the thing is, I've said this a million times on my channel, life is difficult, life is hard. Bad things are going to happen to all of us. Bad things are going to happen tomorrow. Bad things are going to happen like a year from now, whatever. But we don't have to add to that pain by going out and searching for pain. And essentially what the Empowered Wife book talks about in a kind of a different context, but the concept of shopping for pain. And a lot of people can shop for pain in a marriage, look for evidence that your husband is terrible because he doesn't pick up his socks, or look for evidence that life is so horrible because of the duties or the trauma you experienced. And I'm not, I had grief to work through when we first got married. I had grief to work through after my first son was born. But the lighthearted fun, the willingness to seek out joy, those things have really kept us afloat and kept us playful and in love in such a beautiful way. Playful fun in marriage just allows you to kind of bring out your inner child. It allows you to flirt with each other. It allows life to be happier in general. And it ties in with that first example of self-care in the sense that choosing to be playful and add little bits of joy into your dynamic as a couple can keep things just lighter in general, because it's not always fun or cute or glamorous to combine finances and to pay bills together and to raise children together and to do these kind of sloppy life mundane activities. So adding in playful fun and making sure there's still that spark of happy joy, it can really just elevate your overall happiness, but then also your relationship and love. For example, last night we played gin rummy. After the kids went to bed and before we went to bed, we just played cards and we were able to joke and tease and laugh. And we like watching comedy shows together, and we'll DM each other funny content even when we're in the same room. We try to make each other laugh. We try to find the fun in life, and it's so important to keep your relationship not in like this constant state of silly joy where you can't have a deep conversation or emotional conversation or whatever. But if you're only talking about like house chores and mundane things and then really serious topics, you can lose some of that sparkly fun that you probably had at the beginning of your relationship. I've learned that searching for drama in a long-term relationship, like searching for that intensity, it can sometimes be a coping mechanism. Like you're used to an extreme level of emotion and drama in a relationship, and so it's like you're always fighting with somebody. The antidote to that, I think, is having fun and being able to laugh at yourself and being able to laugh with your partner, not at your partner, with your partner, and being willing to just enter into every day with a curiosity and excitement for a way to make memories together and to find joy. I do know that life is not always sunshine and roses. I am the first to acknowledge that, but I don't think that means that we shouldn't be searching for ways to infuse sunshine and roses into our marriage in a way that can open up avenues for playful flirting and fun and laughter and happiness. My husband and I were actually really good friends before we fell in love, and we've never lost that friendship. Like that thread of friendship has been there from the beginning, and if anything, it's just stronger now. And I think it's because he is really taking the lead on this, but just infusing fun into our marriage and into our everyday life and with our kids now. It's just brought that sparkly happiness that I think a lot of couples lose as they just enter into this slog of daily living. And I know life is tough. I know the work week is hard and the laundry is never ending and the kids are, they need all this stuff too. But we can still take time to laugh together. We can still take time to have fun together. And I think also if you have a willingness to be interested in the things that interest your partner, that can really help as well. You know, when I first became a housewife and I would be home all day and I was just learning about femininity content and YouTube and different creators I really enjoyed, my husband would listen to me talk about that stuff sometimes for hours, even though he doesn't super care like about the topics the way I do. And that just was really meaningful to me. And I do the same for him. He might not want to listen to me describe a K-drama to him. We give each other the dignity of listening to each other's interests, because that is kind of how we were when we were dating, and it's something that I think should last throughout marriage, and it does bring that sparkle of happiness as well. Very typical, you've probably heard this advice before, but that is to infuse grace and forgiveness into your marriage. Your spouse is the person closest to you in life, and I think it's so important to not view them, again, like I said earlier, as public enemy number one, not view them as someone who's out to get you or someone with bad intentions, but instead view them as a person who you love, and to extend grace and love and forgiveness towards them, and to apologize. I know that so many people have described that their partner or their mother or father, you know, has never apologized in their life, or they could count on one hand how many times they've heard their mom say, "I'm sorry." Don't be that person. Learn how to take responsibility when you mess up, and learn how to apologize, and likewise learn how to forgive. There's nothing worse than having a person you're in a relationship with bring up something in an argument that bothered them, that happened like a year ago or even 6 months ago. I'm always like, whenever that's happened to me, I'm just like, why didn't you bring that up when it happened? Like, so you've been harboring this for all this time? Like, we were having this great time for the past 5 months and you were just in the back of your head mad about that situation? Like, I don't believe in doing relationships that way. I kind of never have, but especially in the last 5 years of marriage, you have to be so careful to not hold on to things from the past. Like, when someone apologizes for something, do your best to forgive them. Do your best to forgive them. And forgiveness is a huge component to the Christian faith. So I take it very seriously, but also repentance. The concept of repenting can flow into marriage. Like I said, learning how to say, "I'm sorry." You know, there's some jokes I've seen online before where this is how I apologize to my husband. And it's like a woman who will come up to her grumpy looking husband on the couch and she'll just be like, "Oh, what are you watching on TV? What do you want for dinner?" And like, just start being nice again. And that's not an apology. It doesn't matter if it's your husband doing it or the wife doing it. It's not an apology. I cannot stand when people can't say "I'm sorry," but instead they choose to just start being nice again. That's not okay. That's something I saw a lot growing up, and I will never be that person. Like, when I'm wrong to my husband, like when I get snippy with him or when I do something hurtful, I go to him, and it sucks. It does suck to humble yourself and apologize, but you have to, because it's the way that you show you love that person and that you value the fact that they are hurt and that you hurt them and that you don't want to hurt them in the future. You know, apologies, and not just empty apologies, not just "I'm sorry for doing that" and then going and doing it again the next week, but apologizing and then changing. And the reason I include this in the grace and forgiveness part of this advice is because I'm not perfect. And it's not just my husband who's been doing his thing over the last 5 years and I just need to give him grace and forgiveness. No, he needs to give me grace and forgiveness too. It's like a two-way thing. So learn to say "I'm sorry," because if you can't, you're going to have a hard time in marriage. I guarantee it. If you haven't figured that out already, you're going to have a hard time in marriage. And if you're married to someone who can't say "I'm sorry," my condolences to you. I think that's one of the worst things ever. So humility is never fun, but I've learned that it's often the people who are like the most insecure and often even prideful who can't say "I'm sorry." And that's the thread I hope to weave through this whole marriage video. To have a great marriage, I've learned you can't be prideful. You can't be this person who thinks that you're better than your spouse. And that's something I've learned in the last 5 years of marriage. Sorry, I'm like sinking into the floor. It's what I've learned in the last 5 years of marriage, and that is pride has no place in a marriage. You know, marriage is honestly such a tool the Lord can use to humble us and to grow us as better Christians to be more like Christ. It's a wonderful opportunity to learn how to serve and love more. But then there's also, like I keep saying, the lighthearted side of things, choosing to do self-care, choosing to have fun and laugh with your spouse. And this goes together with grace and forgiveness and apologizing, because if you never apologize and if you don't extend grace and forgiveness, how are you and your husband going to have a fun time laughing together and enjoying the day-to-day life? Like playing cards together. You can't, because there's all that built up tension and problems and wounds and hurt and pain, and you're not going to avoid hurt and wounds in marriage. You're not. But you can heal as the wounds come along through apologizing and acknowledging when you've hurt your spouse and asking for their forgiveness, and then also being the person to extend forgiveness when you receive a heartfelt apology or even beforehand. They don't always wipe the slate clean, especially if we're talking about like serious marriage ending things like infidelity, but being snippy at your husband, blah, 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 all day. A sincere apology can go a long way to showing respect for your spouse, showing that you respect him enough as a person to acknowledge that you wronged him. And once that's out of the way, yes, let's go play cards together and laugh and have fun. And I think that's honestly the biggest change, the biggest thing I've done differently to break the cycle, as I said in point number 2. Apologizing and offering grace and forgiveness and working on that side of our relationship, how we treat each other, our behavior, all of that allows us to focus on the fun and the happiness and the flirting and the dating and the sparkle and also the self-care, because we don't have that built up tension, because we just work through our things. And so I could clearly talk about this forever and ever and ever, and I'm so sorry that this video is so long. Thank you so much for watching. If you've gotten this far, like the video, because clearly you like the video, you got to the end. But in all seriousness, it does help other feminine women find our community. Again, whatever I missed, I know I missed a lot because I could keep talking, but leave your advice in the comment section below, especially anybody who's been married longer than me. I'd love to hear it. People from different cultures, different backgrounds, different types of marriages, leave your advice. You guys know that I am an American housewife, stay-at-home mom, so that's my perspective. But if you're a working wife, give your 2 cents. If you're from a different country, different culture, give your 2 cents as well. You never know who you might be helping. If you haven't yet, subscribe and join the feminine family. And if you're interested in more of this kind of content, I have a lot of relationship related content on my channel. And don't forget to watch my latest vlog. It is long, but it's essentially 2 or 3 vlogs put together into one long video. So in general, thank you guys. I love you. I hope that you have a wonderfully blessed and love-filled week, my beautiful sisters.